Donald Trump called him tough. Rush Limbaugh read one of his articles live on his radio show. Ann Coulter tweeted that article to her 1.5 million followers and declared every sentence is perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, former chief editor of the Jewish Press, Elliot Resnick.
Welcome to the Elliot Resnick Show.
With us today, once again, is Rabbi Ben Packer, director of the Jerusalem Heritage House and a former Jewish Press columnist. We interviewed him right before the war in Gaza broke out, and since we received several compliments after our last conversation, we thought it would be wise to check in with him once again. Rabbi Packer, welcome back to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. First of all, mazel tov on the engagement of, I believe, your oldest son.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much.
We should have a lot of nachas from the couple-to-be.
Amen.
What's your sense of the mood in Israel? Are Israelis as frustrated as I am that the war isn't over yet and that we're providing free food to our enemy every single day?
Israelis are definitely frustrated. It's been a while. People are doing reserve duty for a second or maybe third time at this point. People who are supposed to finish the army obviously are not finishing the army. It's been a long time, and the results are quite good on some level, but on another level are not as good as, of course, we would like. There's still hostages. The heads of Hamas are still alive. There's still the whole situation in the north. For some reason, Yemen is still a country. There's all kinds of these situations that we would hope would have been fixed by now, but it appears will take a little bit longer.
I want to read to you something you wrote the other week. Every week you write a news update, which you post on Facebook and elsewhere. And in
used to be in the Jewish Press.
Yes, it used to be in the Jewish Press. That's correct. I'm sorry that's no longer there, but that was not up to me. As you know, the week that I left, your column left. In your update 2 weeks ago, you wrote, quote, Israel continues to provide truckloads of aid to Gaza. It's unclear as to why. Some Israelis find the situation absurd and have been trying to block/delay the trucks from reaching Gaza from within Israel. This week, they took it up a step when they not only blocked trucks, but threw their contents on the ground and even set fire to a few trucks. It's refreshing to see some Jews with both common sense and courage to take action. End quote. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
You know, it's very hard to understand why the Israeli government thinks it's okay to give any kind of aid to our enemies. I think from what I understand, the strategy is something like, if we give enough aid, then Hamas can't make money off less aid, meaning supply and demand, basically. You know, if there's more supply, then the price goes down. But that's only true if any aid is allowed in. If no aid is allowed in, then you win. And that's what we want to do. So there's a strategy there, but it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong to aid your enemy in time of war. That's not a new rule.
Yeah, sieges are about as old as warfare is. And even in guerrilla warfare, I think some countries have this theory that we'll convince the population that we're not against you, we're only against the terrorists. And if you cooperate with us and you don't feed the terrorists, I think that situation was like in Africa, in the colonies, where there was no history. We have a 100-year history with the Arabs here. We know what the population is. It's not like, we're undecided and maybe we'll get them on our side.
Certainly there are situations where some kind of dictator, some kind of tyrannical situation where somebody and his friends, Iran, for example, have taken over and probably the bulk of the population doesn't agree what's going on, or at least a large segment of the population. But that is not the case in Gaza at all. Yeah. It's the polar opposite. I mean, I'm not saying there's no resident in Gaza that is opposed to Hamas, but first of all, most people who are opposed to Hamas think they're too left-wing. And, if there's anyone who thinks that Israel should be allowed to exist or anything like that, that'd be crazy. These people support Hamas plus.
I missed a word you said. You said the people who support Hamas are left-wing?
No, I'm saying people who are opposed to Hamas think that Hamas is too left-wing. They should be more. They should be more right-wing, more ISIS, more whatever. I mean, those are the people who oppose Hamas. There's no one on the other side.
I remember, I think Rabbi Ben Packer used to say years ago, when they talk about moderate Arabs, he said, are these Arabs who want to kill Jews moderately? I mean, what do you mean by moderate?
It's a complete fake. It's a complete fake to say there's this whole population in Gaza that's just stuck in the crossfire or has been, subjugated by their leaders. That's not That's not an accurate reflection at all of the situation in Gaza.
Yeah. In that same news update, you wrote, quote, there was also a march, this is I think 2 weeks ago, there was also a march by approximately 50,000 Israelis in support of renewing Jewish communities in Gaza. The march was completely ignored by the mainstream Israeli media. This is how most revolutions happen, end quote. Can you elaborate on this comment as well?
Yeah, I would say that, 50,000 people is a significant amount of people. And it was completely ignored because they don't want to believe that a large chunk of the people, if not the overwhelming majority, do believe that Jewish communities should be reestablished in Gaza. The idea, whatever happens after the war, the idea that what's called the Netzarim corridor that splits the Gaza Strip in half and goes from the border with Israel into the ocean, the idea that the army is not going to be there, it's almost like impossible to even imagine. And if that's the case, why shouldn't there be Jewish communities on that land? If you want the army to stay there, you're going to need to have Jewish communities. There's nowhere in the world right now where there are Israeli soldiers where there aren't Jewish communities. It just doesn't exist. And it never has. There's Jewish soldiers in the Golan Heights, and there's communities in the Golan Heights. Northern Israel on the Lebanese border, Jordan Valley. Wherever there are Israeli soldiers, there are Israeli civilians. So if we're going to have Israeli soldiers somewhere, we're going to have Israeli civilians. So we just need to be adults about this and kind of grow up.
Why is it essential for there to be Israeli soldiers in this Netzarim corridor?
Because that's the only way to stop the flow of terrorists, guns, and anything else going through the Gaza Strip. Now, of course, other things should be done as well. And I think the whole place should be conquered and this, that, and the other. But if that's not done, everybody, I think, agrees that the Netzarim corridor will be held. Who else is going to hold it?
Of course, we should settle it because it's our land. Hashem gave it to us. But besides for that, though, if the people who only care about geopolitics, if you have no soldiers in the Gaza Strip, there's absolutely nothing stopping the UN from voting tomorrow for a Palestinian state. And what are you going to do then? Even if I were you were prime minister, if you have an entire area that's completely Arab and you have no Jewish soldiers there and no Jewish citizens there, and tomorrow the UN declares a state, what are you going to do about it? It's going to be a fait accompli.
For a complicated situation, it's amazingly not so complicated. For example, in Hebron, which of course is a very historically Jewish city, when the city was split according to agreements that Israel made, where Jews lived is today accessible to Jews, and where Jews did not live at that time is not accessible to Jews. That's a general rule. If Jews don't live there, we probably won't be able to go there. By the way, that's true of whole Arab countries in the Middle East. Jews don't live there, and we're not allowed to go there. It goes together.
Right. No, but also for various reasons, if they have a state, it's much worse for us nationalistically, religiously, psychologically. And there's nothing stopping them from having a state if there are no Jews there. The only thing
Hamas didn't technically have a state, but look what they were able to do.
Well, true, 100%, but it's much worse because once they have a state, then you're like, what are you going to erase the state off the map?
They established all this stuff through illicit smuggling. If they were a state, they wouldn't have to do that. They would just buy the stuff off the free market and build a terror powerhouse. Does anyone say they wouldn't? Did they say they wouldn't? It's crazy.
Right. Then you would also be occupying a foreign nation indefinitely. And politically, it would be all much worse. And there's nothing stopping them from doing that as long as there are no Jews there. As soon as there are Jews there, they can't really declare a state there.
Well, there's nothing stopping us from fixing the problem either, other than ourselves.
100%. Okay. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry because we got distracted. Can you talk to me about those teenagers who have been taking over these trucks? Is that a growing phenomenon? Who are these people?
I think there's a certain part of the population that is not influenced by Western culture here, and that is in itself quite refreshing. They don't have this call it European value system. They don't have that at all. They're just Jewish, and they just live in the Middle East, and so it's natural for them to say, well, it's like we're at war. You can't aid the people. I don't care who you are. You can't aid the people that we're at war with. So if you try to do that, we're going to get in your way. I think it's incredibly natural, and I think it's great to see. This is how a lot of human progress has happened throughout the world. You're in America, the American Revolution looked pretty similar with the tea. The tea and these trucks are looking pretty similar right now, aren't they?
Right. Is it a growing phenomenon or more and more of these trucks being stopped?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because there's different ways of the aid getting in, but it's certainly a growing phenomenon for sure. These trucks, they got to really think twice before driving through certain areas, you got to imagine.
In relation to this war, you recently wrote on Facebook that giving back the Sinai Desert in Egypt in 1982 was a mistake. Why was it a mistake?
Well, because Egypt, whether they have malice or not, I don't know. But they're certainly part of the problem, not part of the solution. They've been smuggling weapons in to Hamas for all these years, making money off this. I mean, they're very responsible for this, and they couldn't have done it if they hadn't been in the Sinai. And we put them in the Sinai with this peace deal.
Right. And people always say, well, we haven't had a war with Egypt in 40 years. And Moshe Feiglin always says, well, we haven't had a war with Syria in 40 years either. The only difference is that Syria has backward Soviet weapons from 40 years ago, and Egypt has all the modern U.S. weapons because of the peace deal we signed.
Moshe Feiglin is very rarely wrong.
A few weeks ago, several terrorists attacked a concert hall in Russia. When the police caught the terrorists, they cut off the ear of one of the terrorists and forced him to eat it. It seems to me that if Israel wants a long-lasting peace with the Arabs, they need to not just win a war, but also need to scare them to death, as they did in 1948 and 1967. Israel, however, constantly gives terrorists the royal treatment. You see videos of captured terrorists in Israel. They're not scared at all. They go to prison, they get a free education, they're released a few years later in a prisoner exchange. Israel is doing a lot more in Gaza than I thought it would do back in October, but it seems to me that it's still doing far, far less than what's really necessary to put an end to Arab terror. Do you agree?
I don't know. Listen, the hostage situation is a very sensitive one, obviously. At the end of the day, you have to just be consistent. And if the terrorists think that we're wavering on things that we've claimed are important, then what do you expect to happen? If we claim that this land is very important to us, or as they say in the vernacular, Ein lanu eretz acheres, right? We don't have another land. So if that's true, then start acting like it. Don't start cutting off pieces of the land of Israel like the Russians cut off the Arabs' ears. That's not how you do it. You want to be serious about something. You back up what you say. The terrorists will get the message. They're not stupid. They get messages if they're clear enough. And if we were clear about what we were going to do, I would think we wouldn't need to be cutting off ears. They would hear the message really well through those ears and run away.
But you don't think that we've given them so much self-respect for over the last 30, 40 years, they've gotten so bold, don't they really need to be taught a lesson?
I think we need to be taught a lesson. We need to teach ourselves better our values and what we're trying to do. I'm not for them, and of course, we need to be as harsh with them as we can stomach. But we need to understand why we're here, who we are, what we're trying to accomplish. If once we have all that, like these guys who are throwing the aid off the trucks, those are guys who know what they're doing. Those are real Jews right there.
Right. I think the sixth pasuk of Sefer Shoftim mentions that the Jews cut off the big toes and big thumbs of, I think it's Adoni Bezek. And the Ralbag, I think it is, says they did it because they want to scare all the other kings, basically. Sometimes you just need to scare people. And it seems to me we're fighting very surgically. And you fight surgically, it doesn't scare people. I think you need a shock and awe to top all previous shock and awe operations in history.
Listen, the Army's doing a great job. The soldiers are amazing. It's just at the top. The problem's at the top. That's not a secret. Anytime somebody shows any kind of promise to be a great Jewish leader, they find a way to get rid of them, whether it was Mordechai Kahana or whether it was this guy Bucharest. Of course, Overwinter, everyone's talking about. He's the most recent one. Yeah, all these guys, they'd be great leaders of the Army. Why? They're not even in the Army anymore. It's crazy.
All the people you mentioned were generals?
They were all generals, and they should have been in charge. And instead, these other guys are in charge. And how's that going?
Yeah, well, the political leadership is a problem also because, a Pew Research poll in 2016 found that 48% of Jews in Israel want the Arabs out of Israel. Now, even if that number is an exaggeration, Pew Research is pretty good. So let's say they're off by half. So it's a pretty high number. It's not 2%. Yet the party that advocated this idea, Kach, is banned from the Knesset. I don't mean to insult you or anything, but why are right-wing Israelis so passive? Why do they allow themselves to be denied representation? The left never takes no for an answer. Why do we?
I think to some degree, I actually had this conversation at a wedding last night. I think to some degree, it shows the responsibility of the right on some level. I don't know if it's always the right move, but from the view of the right, the state needs to be preserved so that Jews can be safe. And the left is just an irresponsible child. So they are willing to literally burn down the barn just to get their point across. And so it's hard for the right wing to take risks that could endanger the state or the Jewish people. They're going to be very cautious, maybe overly cautious. Whereas the left, where the pilots aren't going to show up, and like, yeah, we'll just burn the whole thing down. Like a kid who didn't get his candy, just throws a hissy fit in the grocery store.
Yeah, but it still seems to me that the left is willing to go all the way, and we're never willing to go all the way. That you're going to constantly lose to them.
Because the left is actually willing to self-destruct. I mean, they're willing to commit communal suicide, and the right is much more hesitant about that.
No, I get your point, but I still think, like, again, something like the Kach movement. It's not even about the Kach party. It's about there is no one who will ever run for Knesset to the right of Netanyahu who will not muzzle himself. Ben, if you always feel they all muzzle themselves, they all will not say what they want to say because they know if they say what they want to say, they'll be kicked out of Knesset. But then you're never going to get votes that way. If you muzzle yourself, you won't get votes. People want an honest person. People want an idealistic person. And so, in the meantime, the most right-wing person in Israel is basically Likud, which is pathetic because a large part of the country is to the right of Likud, and yet they're never represented really.
Like the war, it's a very frustrating situation. But it doesn't mean we won't get there. I don't know how exactly we'll get there, obviously. But, crazier things have happened. And, the right wing, for all of its pluses, having a leader that really can bring everybody together is not so obvious who that person is. So, maybe we're just not ready yet. When Yehoshua came into the land, he didn't conquer everything all at once. As the British people say, it's a process.
So it's interesting you mentioned Yehoshua because you wrote, and I did not know this, that Arabs set the gravesite of Yehoshua on fire 2 weeks ago. See, again, it's extremely frustrating because to me, if Israel was really a proper Jewish state with a proper Jewish government, I would kill 10,000 Arabs just for the chutzpah of trying to set Yeshua's grave on fire. You
just take a step. You take a step back and say, if Israel was a proud state, you'd be able to visit Yeshua's grave whenever you wanted, instead of like once every few months. It's a ridiculous situation. And it's not like it's in the middle, Joseph's grave, it's in the middle of Shechem. So I'm not saying we shouldn't take action but I can see the point of why that's difficult. Joshua's grave is across the street from a Jewish community. Like, what's going on? It's not even Area A. It's Area B. It's crazy that there's not access to Jews to that grave. I mean, of all the graves, if you want to make a declaration that this land is ours, I'm not saying that other big figures in biblical history aren't important, but Joshua's pretty high up there.
Yeah, he kind of conquered the land.
And Kalev is also buried there. So, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from protecting them and allowing access to them. Nothing. Nothing.
The Arabs, every single time there's a threat, quote unquote, never is, but they always make it up. But whenever there's a quote unquote threat to the Temple Mount, they immediately riot because this is their holy site. They're going to defend it at all costs. Yeah. And we Jews acted the same way when we were normal, once upon a time. In the times of the base of Mikdash, there was this Kohen Gadol who all of a sudden was revealed to be a Tzeduki. He poured the water on his feet instead of on the Mizbeach. And the Jews, I think, either stoned him or nearly stoned him to death with their esrogim. I mean, that's how normal people react, with righteous anger. We don't seem to have any righteous anger anymore. We let Yoshua's and Yosef's kever be burned, and we're like, yeah, okay, it was burned, big deal.
Listen, we were down for a long time. There are consequences for that. And it's going to take more than Ben Gurion and Weitzman to bring us back. We're going to get there. I don't think anyone doubts that. But it's going to take a little bit more for us to get there, unfortunately.
On that point, let me ask you, I guess, maybe the last question. So years ago, I heard Baruch Marzel, or I read him saying that he's not scared about the long-term future because we have children and the left wing has puppies. So it was a cute line, but nonetheless, so okay, I think religiously we're like 20% of the country now. You include Sephardim, it's even more. But even with numbers, supposing in 20, 30, 40 years, you have 30% or 40% or even 50% of the population, the left wing is not going to give up power easily. They won't care if they're a minority. They are not going to give up power easily.
I don't think it will shift through an election.
So how do you think it will shift?
I don't think it will be democratic. I think democratically, the right wing and the religious have a commanding lead already, and that doesn't seem to help so much because the left wing controls certain institutions that just anytime things get too right wing, they just slam it down, So it's going to have to be a different way, most likely. Like is done in the Middle East. But we shouldn't think we're so much different than everybody else. We're different, but not so much different.
I see. All right. Well, thank you so very much for that view from the ground.
You should know that Israelis are confident. People here are not in panic and not in depression. We are aware of the situation. It's a difficult situation, but it's not one of desperation here on any level. The people here are confident. We feel like we're going to win, and we're very much praying and hoping for it very soon.
Yeah, I hope so, because I was in Gush Katif before all the communities were evacuated, and most people there also were cheerfully, but I would say naively confident. Sometimes confidence can be misplaced, or it could just be childish. I hope it's not childish in this case, but
Hard lessons are learned hard.
yeah, and it's winning the war is also winning the peace, as they say. So I don't know, but all right, I hope for the best, and God willing, things will work out. So again, thank you for your time and your perspective.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that does it for us. If you like this podcast, please consider subscribing to it and giving it a good rating and a nice review if you're so inclined. I hope you enjoyed the episode and have a great day or a great night, depending on when you're listening to this podcast.